I pushed the words out of a smile that felt like shattered glass and congratulated Tyler. Anthony is my name. I just saw the loss of 5 years of my life to a 23-year-old who had been at Ravens Park Ventures for just 3 months. I am 44 years old. Tyler smiled as though he had merited it. The stench of sadness and stale coffee filled the conference room. Everyone gave a clap. I also gave a clap. Gerald Patterson, my manager, was standing at the head of the table, his chest swollen like a rooster. Tyler's going to do great things as our new regional operations director, he stated. I had been preparing for the same role since 2019. When old Henderson retired, I would have the same job that I had been promised. I maintained a neutral expression and folded my hands. But where hope once resided in my chest, something chilly took root. Gerald's nephew was named Tyler. Everyone was aware of it. No one discussed it. The child's diploma was freshly inked with a business degree, and he exuded the confidence that comes with never having to work for anything. He had seen me for 3 months as I oversaw supply chain operations, dealt with vendor contracts, and troubleshooted equipment malfunctions in 4 different states. He was my boss now. Anthony's been invaluable in getting Tyler up to speed, said Gerald, as if that improved it. As if 60-hour work weeks and 5 years of flawless performance ratings were merely fancy job training for someone else's future. I gave a nod. I answered, happy to help. The meeting was over. People poured out, congratulating Tyler and shaking his hand. Slower than normal, I picked up my pen and notepad. Like when you wake up in the middle of the night and suddenly realize something that has been bugging you for months. My mind felt clear and keen. When I got to the door, Gerald grabbed my arm. We stood by ourselves in the conference room and said, Anthony, stay a minute. He untied his tie and made an effort to appear empathetic. I know this might come as a surprise, he replied. But Tyler brings fresh perspectives and new energy. Sure, I replied. I stared at him for a long time before saying, you understand, right? It's nothing personal. Gerald was 52, with thinning hair and a squishy center. To cover the bald areas, he combed over. When his father-in-law retired, he acquired his role. I was aware of the irony. I understand perfectly, I replied. He eased up. Good, I knew you'd be professional about this. That's why you're such a valuable team member. Excellent. I was valuable enough to train his nephew and be happy about it, but not valuable enough for the promotion I had earned. I returned to my desk and took a seat. There was the usual buzz of activity in the office. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, individuals resolving issues. Before I began typing, I opened my laptop and gazed at the screen for a whole minute. In March 2019, shortly after my divorce was finalized, I began working at Ravens Park Ventures. I needed a new beginning, and manufacturing logistics seemed like a good foundation upon which to develop. The business distributed industrial equipment throughout the Southwest, work that was dull but paid well and allowed me to sleep at night. They needed someone with my experience, so Gerald personally recruited me and shook my hand. Prior to my employment being abolished due to budget cuts, I had worked for my former firm for 12 years. Starting afresh at 44 wasn't simple, but Gerald presented it as a chance. He had stated, we're growing fast. When I interviewed him, I became the right person. There is a lot of room for advancement for the right people. When shipments were delayed, I worked on the weekends, stayed late when clients needed help, cultivated connections with vendors from Houston to Phoenix. I had perfect performance reviews. Gerald was always grinning. Bigger things were always promised. As he would say, your management material. Anthony, us need to be patient. I had patience. Every other weekend, Sophia, my daughter, came to visit. Now that she was 16, she could see her father's weariness. On Sunday mornings, she would occasionally find me at the kitchen table, working on work emails with my laptop open. She would say, Dad, it's the weekend. I would say, just catching up, to her. She would roll her eyes, but she knew when she said, "Building something good here." Her mother had remarried a lawyer who coached minor league and had a respectable schedule. I was the overworked father who never missed a school performance and always gave her birthday money on time. When Gerald hinted that his nephew might be joining the company 6 months ago, the first crack developed. "Smart kid," he had remarked. I nodded without giving it much thought. Just graduated from the University of Texas, business degree. Employers frequently hired new grads, assigned them to entry-level jobs, allow them to gain a thorough understanding of the business. Tyler, however, didn't begin at the bottom. He began with the title of operations expert and a pay I could only speculate about at the office next to Gerald's. Gerald presented him as if he were visiting a member of the royal family. Gerald declared, "Tyler is going to observe our processes, learn how we do things." Tyler made observations by listening in on my customer calls, taking notes while I described vendor discussions, and posing queries that revealed he was not familiar with the fundamentals of our work. However, I would give him credit for being kind and eager. "Yes, sir, and thank you," as if his mother had brought him up properly. "Because that's what you do." I trained him. You assist the new man. Even if the new employee's uncle signs your paychecks and his last name is Patterson, even when you begin to wonder where it's all going. 3 weeks ago, during a conversation I wasn't intended to hear, I realized. To complete the quarterly reports, I had stayed late. Except for the cleaning staff, the workplace was deserted. I heard noises coming from Gerald's office as I was making my way to the break room for coffee. The corridor conveyed sound more effectively than most people imagined, and his door was cracked open. Gerald was stating, "The board is going to ask questions." Another, older, deeper voice said, "Tyler's only been here 2 months. James Mitchell from corporate, most likely." "You said Anthony was ready for promotion." "Anthony's solid, but Tyler's family, and he's got the degree. The board likes degrees. What about Anthony's experience?" Gerald chuckled. The chuckle wasn't cruel, but it wasn't nice either. For 30 seconds, I stood in that corridor listening to them make plans for my future. Anthony is a good worker, dependable, but he's not executive material. He'll keep doing what he's doing, make good money, and everything will work out. Henderson's job would go to Tyler. I would help him, coach him, and act appreciative of the chance. Gerald went on. "Anthony won't cause problems. He's got a daughter and alimony payments. He needs this job. He'll fall in line." I then slipped away in silence so they wouldn't hear me. After returning to my desk and saving my work, I quietly drove home from the building. I had trouble sleeping that night. I couldn't stop thinking about what Gerald had said. "He'll fall in line," they said, as if I were a horse waiting to be saddled, as if I had earned the right to be thankful for scraps after 5 years of devotion and hard work. I reflected on Sophia and how pleased she had been to hear about the potential promotion. She had informed her pals that her father would become a director. I would now have to explain why it was not taking place. I recalled my ex-wife's constant criticism of me for being too meek. She had commented, "You let people walk over you, Anthony." At one of our final arguments, perhaps she had been correct when she said, "Stand up for yourself for once." I arrived at work the following morning with a different attitude. I took a closer look at Tyler. I saw how Gerald kept me focused on daily operations while involving him in executive meetings, observed how other managers began to defer to Tyler when making judgments that ought to have been made by me. Something broke inside of me 3 weeks later as I sat in that conference room and watched Tyler receive congrats for a position that he hadn't earned, just clarity, neither despair nor rage. Gerald believed that I needed this position. I assumed that since I had a daughter to support and bills to pay, I would be in line. There were many things he was mistaken about. I launched my laptop and began writing my letter of resignation. I had steady hands. I had a clear head. I knew exactly what I was going to do for the first time in my life. It was precisely 4:30 p.m. when I turned in my letter of resignation. Friday. Gerald had just returned from showing Tyler his territory by taking him on a tour of the warehouse. Gerald's attitude changed from one of bewilderment and disbelief to one of what appeared to be terror when I knocked on his door, gave him the envelope, and said, "This is my 2 weeks' notice." He ripped the envelope open and skimmed the paper, his eyes darting up and down. He asked, "Is this a joke?" "No, sir." I remained silent and let him speak. "You can't be serious. You're leaving because Tyler got the promotion." Gerald got to his feet and paced behind his desk. "Anthony, let's be reasonable here. You're upset. I get it. But walking away from 5 years of building your career, that's not smart. I've made my decision. There it was. What about your daughter? Your responsibilities, the power he believed he possessed, the rationale behind my silence and compliance." I responded, "I'll manage." Gerald changed his voice, become more difficult. "You realize how this looks, right? Quitting because you didn't get promoted. It's unprofessional, childish." I grinned. "I can see how you'd think that. I won't give you a good reference. You understand that, walking out like this, leaving us hanging. No company's going to want someone who throws tantrums." My stomach felt chilly. After 5 years of flawless performance, I was now having a fit. After working weekends and staying up late for 5 years, I was now acting impolitely. I said, "That's your choice." Gerald took a seat again and tried a new strategy. "Look, Anthony, I like you. You're good at what you do. But Tyler brings something different to the table. Youth, fresh ideas, vision." "Vision," I said again. "The board wants innovation, new thinking. Tyler represents the future of this company. And what do I represent?" Gerald hesitated. "He is valuable enough to train his replacement, but not valuable enough to advance. Experience and stability, those are valuable, too." The math made sense to me. "I appreciate the clarification," I said. "Don't do this, Anthony. Take the weekend. Think it over. Come back Monday, and we'll pretend this conversation never happened." I stared at Gerald for a while. He really thought I was going to give in. Felt that I would give in if my reference was threatened and my professionalism was called into question. "I'll finish out my 2 weeks," I said. Gerald's expression hardened as he said, "Teach Tyler everything he needs to know. You'll train him." "You think Tyler needs training from someone who quits when things don't go his way? He's going to need to understand the vendor contracts, the supply chain logistics, and the emergency protocols." I maintained a low tone. "Unless you plan to figure all that out yourself." That resonated with me. Gerald was aware that he was ignorant of the technical aspects of operations. Tyler didn't either. For another 2 weeks at least, they needed me. "Fine," said Gerald. 2 weeks. But don't expect any favors. Don't expect me to help you land somewhere else. You're burning bridges here, Anthony." I smiled and turned to go. I halted at the door as Gerald screamed after me, "Anthony, you're making a mistake. A big one. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." I felt lighter than I have in months as I made my way back to my workstation. People were going home for the weekend, so the workplace was largely vacant. Tyler remained at his desk, studying organizational charts as if they held the universe's secrets. I took a seat, turned on my laptop, and began writing down all the information Tyler would want: contact details for vendors, emergency protocols, and troubleshooting manuals. The individuals who relied on our supply systems deserved better than anarchy, not because Gerald begged me to. It buzzed on my phone. My daughter sent me a text message. "Dad, can we get dinner tomorrow? I want to hear about your week." I replied, with a grin, "Absolutely. I've got news to share. Finally, good news. News about defending my rights and avoiding those who didn't appreciate my contributions." Gerald believed that I was being punished. I would be appreciative of the opportunity to remain if my reference were threatened. He was unaware of what he had just started. There were revelations on Monday morning. As usual, I got there early, and Tyler was already at his desk, looking overburdened. He was feverishly taking notes from vendor communications while spreadsheets were open on 3 monitors. Morning, Tyler. I welcomed him. With a smile of relief on his face, he asked, "How's the transition going?" "Anthony, thank God, I've been here since 6 trying to understand the Morrison Industries account. Their procurement manager is threatening to cancel our contract if we don't resolve some shipping issue by noon. Our largest client is Morrison Industries. Every year, they placed orders for $2 million worth of heavy machinery parts. For 4 years, I had been directly in charge of their account." I said, "What's the issue?" "Something about delayed titanium brackets from our supplier in Tucson, but I can't figure out which supplier, and their emails are confusing." I glanced at Tyler's display. In addition to looking at supplier contracts unrelated to titanium brackets, he had Morrison's email open. He was drowning. I said, "Tyler," very gently, "did Gerald brief you on the Morrison account? He said you'd handle the transition, but then he mentioned your situation, and I thought maybe I should figure it out myself. Show initiative. My circumstances." They were now referring to it by that name. I walked Tyler through the Morrison connection for the next 3 hours. Described the operation of their just-in-time delivery criteria. I showed him my 4-year-old backup supplier network, helped him see how a minor delivery delay could result in the termination of a contract. Tyler remarked, "This is incredibly complex," as we were wrapping up the crisis resolution. "How do you keep track of all these moving parts?" "Experience," I replied, "and good documentation." When I asked, "Could you show me your documentation system?" I came to a realization. Tyler hadn't been elevated by Gerald without any planning. He had promoted him without knowing the true requirements of the position. Tyler was totally unprepared for the extent of regional operations, but he wasn't incompetent either. I made phone calls during my lunch break, contacting people I had developed over the years. In industrial logistics, news spreads quickly, and Ravens Park modifications were already being discussed. While some were interested in fresh chances, others were worried about continuity. "Anthony," remarked Janet Morrison, the procurement manager who had made the cancellation threat for the morning, "I heard rumors about management changes. Please tell me you're still handling our account for the next 2 weeks." "I am," I said. On the line, there was silence. After that, "Tyler Patterson will be your primary contact." Patterson as in Gerald Patterson, his nephew. "Jesus, Anthony, that kid called me this morning asking questions that made no sense. I thought he was new to the team, not replacing you. He's eager to learn. I don't have time to train Ravens Park's management. We've got production schedules to meet. If your company can't provide competent service, we'll find someone who can." With 4 distinct significant clients, that conversation was repeated 4 times. I had a better idea of what would happen once I departed at the end of the day. Tyler would have trouble. Customers would become irritated. In a frenzy, Gerald would attempt to micromanage things he didn't comprehend. Within 6 months, the entire regional division would begin to lose business. However, that was no longer an issue for me. Gerald summoned me to his office on Tuesday morning. He appeared worn out and anxious. "Anthony, I've been thinking about our conversation Friday. Maybe we were hasty. Maybe there's room for both you and Tyler in management, meaning you could be associate director. Tyler is second in command. You'd handle the technical side. He'd focus on strategic planning. Assistant director." A fictitious title that implied working the same job for the same salary while posing as Tyler's supervisor. I remarked, "That's generous." Gerald's expression hardened as he said, "But I'll stick with my original decision. You're going to regret this, Anthony. I promise you that, perhaps." However, I had had enough of being afraid of Gerald's assurances. In a strategy that involved more than just leaving Ravens Park. I had 3 job interviews set for Wednesday. I had been establishing connections in the Southwest industrial supply chain for 5 years. I had those relationships, not the firm. Silver Links Energy, an Austin-based reseller of renewable energy equipment, conducted my first interview on Thursday morning. For 2 years, David Harrison, their regional manager, had been attempting to steal me. Hold on, I realized my mistake right away. David Harrison. Not Chen. I was not allowed to think about that name. I had been the target of David Harrison's recruitment efforts. David shook hands with me in his office and remarked, "Anthony, I heard through the grapevine that you might be available. Word travels fast." David sent me a job offer as Regional Operations Director, which is exactly the role Gerald had given Tyler. It does when good people become available, especially people with your client relationships. It was 30% more than what I had been earning at Ravens Park. Better perks were offered, and above all, they encouraged me to bring my network of clients along. "We've been trying to break into the heavy machinery component market," David said. "Your relationships with Morrison Industries, Copperfield Manufacturing, and Border States Equipment would be invaluable." It was a morally righteous and common industry practice. Account managers that clients trusted were followed, particularly in a relationship-based industry such as industrial supplies. The clients I'd worked with were free to select their suppliers, and I hadn't signed a non-compete clause. "I'd need to give Ravens Park 2 weeks' notice," I replied. "Of course. Professional courtesy, though I suspect they might release you early once they understand the situation." In that regard, David was correct. Gerald summoned me back to his office on Friday afternoon. Tyler was unhappy as he sat in the corner. "I guess they had heard about my interview on Thursday," Gerald remarked. "I've heard you're interviewing with competitors. I'm exploring opportunities while you're still employed here. While you're training Tyler, that's a conflict of interest." I said nothing. "It's also corporate espionage," Gerald added. "Sharing proprietary information with competitors. I haven't shared any proprietary information. Your client relationships are proprietary. My client relationships are personal. I built them over 5 years of professional service." Gerald had a crimson face. "Now, those clients belong to Ravens Park Ventures. You take them with you, and we'll sue you for everything you're worth." From the corner, Tyler spoke. "Uncle Gerald, maybe we should." "Shut up, Tyler." Gerald's gaze remained fixed on me. "Anthony, you walk out that door and try to steal our clients, and I'll make sure you never work in this industry again." I slowly got up. "Gerald, I've given you 5 years of my life. Perfect performance reviews. 60-hour weeks. I trained your nephew to take the job you promised me. I've been nothing but professional through this entire process, and now I'm finishing my 2 weeks' notice and moving on to a better opportunity. What happens after that depends on how you handle the transition." Gerald reclined in his seat. I went to the door and turned around, saying, "We'll see about that. Tyler, if you need help with anything over the next week, just ask. Despite what your uncle thinks, I want you to succeed." Tyler gave a grateful nod. Gerald scowled. During my final week at Ravens Park, I made sure Tyler had all the information he needed. Tyler was 23 years old and had been thrust into a situation that was out of his control, not because Gerald deserved it. On my last day, I gave Gerald my security badge, tidied up my desk, and bid my coworkers farewell. "This isn't over," stated Gerald. The answer was, "For me, it is." I felt lighter than I have in years when I left Ravens Park Ventures. 6 months later, I received the payoff, but not in the manner I had anticipated. I was getting used to my new position at Silver Links Energy when David Harrison cheerfully summoned me into his office. He slipped a business magazine over his desk and said, "Anthony, you need to see this." The story described how Ravens Park had lost for significant accounts in 5 months, including Morrison Industries and Copperfield Manufacturing, with the Heading: Ravens Park Ventures Regional Division hemorrhages clients. Family drama blamed. The Southwest region had a 60% decline in revenue. The board has started looking into management procedures. David stated, Gerald Patterson was terminated. Last week, apparently, the board discovered that Tyler Patterson had been hired without proper qualifications. Nepotism investigation, they're calling it. I continued reading. After 3 months of battling with accounts he was unable to handle, Tyler voluntarily resigned. He was back at graduate school. The article claims that Morrison Industries sued Gerald for breach of contract after a supply chain malfunction resulted in a $2 million production delay. This is the intriguing aspect, David went on. 3 of their remaining clients have already reached out to us, specifically asking if you're available to handle their accounts. According to the story, a number of former Ravens Park staff members were hired by rival companies, bringing their institutional expertise with them. There were no names mentioned, but I could see the trend. When good people leave a company, others notice. What goes around comes around, David stated. Gerald Patterson spent 5 years taking you for granted. Now he's unemployed while you're building our Southwest division. I returned the magazine after folding it, saying, I feel bad for Tyler. Kid got thrown into a situation he wasn't ready for. Gerald, however, shrugged and said, Tyler will be fine. He's young. He'll learn from this. It's hard to feel sorry for someone who threw away good people to promote family. A year later, I was on business in Tucson and pulled into a diner outside the airport for lunch. Tyler Patterson was reading a textbook while seated by himself in a booth in the corner. When I walked up to him, he looked up. He pointed to the vacant seat opposite from him and said, Anthony, what are you doing here? Business trip. Mind if I sit? Tyler appeared older and more solemn. Industrial supply chain management was the subject of the textbook. I said, back in school. He grinned ruefully and said, MS program at Arizona State. Supply chain focus. Figured I should actually learn what I was supposed to be doing. That's smart. I wanted to thank you, said Tyler, for how you handled everything. You could have hung me out to dry, but you didn't. You tried to help me succeed. You were in an impossible situation. Uncle Gerald still blames you for everything. Says you sabotaged the company. I was sipping my coffee. What do you think? Tyler shut his textbook. I think I was 23 years old with a business degree and no real-world experience. I think Uncle Gerald gave me a job I wasn't qualified for because I was family. And I think you spent 5 years earning a promotion that should have been yours. For a while, we sat in cozy stillness. Tyler apologized. I'm sorry about how everything went down. You deserved better. We both did. I informed them. But sometimes things work out the way they're supposed to. Tyler gave a wink. I heard you're doing well at Silverlinks. I paid for our meals and shook Tyler's hand before heading out, saying, I am, and you'll do well, too, once you're ready. A decent young man, he had been a pawn in his uncle's scheme. After losing his lawsuit against Ravens Park's board of directors for unfair firing, Gerald Patterson declared bankruptcy 6 months later. After graduating with distinction, Tyler found an entry-level job at a Phoenix logistics company, where he learned the ropes over the course of 2 years before receiving his first promotion. What the uncle never comprehended, the nephew had discovered. Advancement and respect must be earned, not given. Sometimes merely leaving and creating something better is the finest form of retaliation.